Carla Rees, and I wanted to share with you my top tips for low flutes playing. So the first of the tips is to celebrate the differences. So we know that low flutes are bigger than C flutes. I mean, that's immediately obvious. But as well as being bigger, they also have a different construction. So that means essentially that they have a different tone quality. So the overlapping pitches, for example, between an alto and a C flute, or between a bass and an alto, will all have different qualities of tone depending on what instrument they're being played on. In the 1850s, when Böhm was developing the alto flute for the first time, he was specifically aiming to create an instrument with a different tone quality than the C flute. So we have a quote from Böhm which explains what he was looking for. He says, "The long-felt need for deeper, stronger, and at the same time more sonorous flute tones has not been satisfactorily provided for, either by the former flute d'amour or by the extension to the foot of a C flute, since the tones thus obtained are weak and uncertain, and their combination difficult and entirely impracticable. There must be created an entirely new instrument in the family of flutes of deeper pitch, similar to the basset horn and to the English horn." So it's really clear from that he was specifically looking for a different type of tone quality. And I think it's our job as low flute players to really capture the essence of those differences and to find how to make it sound rich and strong in the low register, and then for the high register to be softer, perhaps a little airier, perhaps a little bit more mellow, but not bright and penetrating like it is on the C flute. So my second tip applies to actually most things that we do musically with our instruments, but particularly I find it very useful for low flutes, and that is to experiment and to explore. As flute players, it's very easy for us to pick up a flute-like object and play it in the same way that we would with our C flutes that we're obviously very used to playing. However, the differences I was talking about with low flutes mean that there's lots of potential for trying new things, and it might respond differently to how you might expect. So one thing that I completely recommend to everyone is just try doing things differently. Make small changes, be systematic, and learn from what doesn't work as well as from what does. But most importantly, all the way through, just keep listening to the sound quality and see if you're able to produce this rich low register and this very distinctive low flute sound. So now we're on to tip number 3, which is to adjust your posture. A bigger instrument needs a different posture. That kind of goes without saying, but again, we've all got lots of habits built in from our existing flute playing, which sometimes can cause problems on low flutes. You have to work with the instrument rather than against it. I mean, when you think about it, playing a big thing like this, holding it to one side of your body, it's a kind of crazy thing to be doing. So we have to be very careful about how we use the body. So one thing that I think is very important is to create space around the torso. So don't have your arms too far back like this. Just go forwards, bring the flute forwards in a kind of quite comfortable diagonal to your body and a little further down. If I were to move my arms further back, you can hear immediately there's a difference in the tone. So posture still, whatever we're doing with the body, keep listening to the sound and make sure that you can be as relaxed as you possibly can be. Don't allow too much tension to creep in, and also avoid doing this, leaning too far to the left because the instruments are long. There are also postural issues with curved head joints. So when you're playing with the curve, I think it's quite important to get the setup exactly right so that you can adapt around the instrument. So my next tip, this one might not be so immediately obvious, is don't forget the foot joint. It's very easy for us to set up as we'd be used to setting up with a C flute, or even if you're playing a bass, to set up similarly to what you do with the alto. This bass has a curved head joint, so that means there's slight different hand positions than I would have on my straight head alto. And also I also play on an upright bass flute, which also has another set of considerations with hand positions. So it's really important that you adjust your hand positions to suit the instrument you're playing on. With the foot joint, it can have a massive difference on the balance of the instrument, which then relates to posture, it relates to tone quality, it relates to everything we do. So something very simple like the position of the foot joint can actually have a huge impact on your playing overall. So one thing to think about, especially with a bass flute, is making sure the foot joint position doesn't get in the way of the key. It's very easy that keys are quite close together, so if you've got this in slightly the wrong position, you can get some clattering and all sorts of other problems. The hand position in general will relate to the foot joint position, so find the right place for the foot joint and then put the fingers on one at a time from the pinky first. And then once you've got that in place, then just drop the thumb up onto the flute. Nothing complicated, nothing difficult. Think of the shape of the hand. It's exactly the same shape as your actual hand. You don't have to do any contortions or twisting. I like to use the side of the thumb as a pivot. So whatever position I'm in, if I want to reach the foot joint keys, I can bend through my whole arm to get there. That only really works if the foot joint is in exactly the right place. So I would say first thing you do every time you set up your instrument, start with the foot joint, get that in the right place, and then adjust everything else from there. My next tip relates to how we position the flute on our lips. So as a general rule, cover more. So if you think about the difference between a piccolo and a C flute, the piccolo goes high on the lip and the C flute goes a little bit lower. With low flutes, that carries on. So you have to keep putting the flute a little bit lower down on the lip depending on the size of the instrument. So if we think about a kind of goal, which is to cover possibly about a third of the embouchure hole with our bottom lip, that needs actually quite a big adjustment downwards onto the lip. So if I play in a position that maybe I would, for the C flute, it would be somewhere up here. It's perfectly fine as a sound, but to me it lacks that alto flutiness. And also the other thing that often happens if the head joint's too high on the lip is that the pitch tends to be very sharp. So if you're having intonation issues, first thing I would try is just drop it down a little bit lower. So if I put it down into the position I'm used to, you can immediately hear there's a little bit more body in the sound, a little bit more depth, and more of that alto fluty quality. So flute lower and blow down. Blow further down into the embouchure hole than you would expect and use the top lip to do that. People often talk about low flutes having a more relaxed embouchure. I think potentially the aperture needs to be bigger to suit the whole of the instrument, but even with a bigger aperture, we still need to do quite a lot of control with the top lip to blow the air down enough into the flute. And the other thing I find very useful as well is to turn the head joint in more than I do on the C flute. So once I've got my foot joint in place, then I will turn the head joint in, and that gives me a really nice balance. So on to the next one, resonate. This one is super important in terms of tone quality, and actually helps to get rid of tension in the body as well when you're playing. So I think one thing that's very important for all of us as flute players, but especially relevant to low flutes, is to learn how your body can have an impact on the sound. So the mouth, the head, the chest cavities, they can all help to resonate the sound, because some of the vibrations when we play, some of the vibrations in the air go back into the mouth. So it's really important that you keep those spaces as open as you can and experiment with different ways of using those spaces. For example, you might feel that notes in particular registers come from different places in terms of the resonance. And really experiment with these things, keep things open and feel the vibrations coming through. Very often with low flutes you can feel vibrations in the fingers, but you can also, if you're really resonating strongly, you can start to feel this across the chest and you can feel the whole body becoming part of the sound. So it's really useful to explore that, and I think one thing to try with that is just take a few deep breaths, open everything up, keep the spaces open, and then don't force the sound, don't push, just keep as open as you can. So now we're on to tip number 7, which is learn about airspeed. So airspeed is a thing that's always part of our lives as flute players. We need to change the speed of the air to change octaves. So we have to get very good at controlling that. Now, one thing that's interesting is that a flute will keep at the register that you're at until it reaches the threshold of airspeed to leap up to the next one. And that means there's quite a lot of room for error in between, where the airspeed might be slightly faster than you want it to be, but still functioning in the register you're looking for. Low flutes need a slower airspeed than the C flute. So that can be quite difficult to control, especially when we're used to kind of maybe pushing the air to play louder or that kind of thing. And on low flutes it becomes particularly apparent in the middle register where the notes crack really easily, around E, E flat. Or in a crescendo where the note just stops getting louder but instead it loses focus. So I'll try and demonstrate one of those crescendos. So I'm just going to push the air and just see what happens. Okay, that was super fast version, but you could hear how the sound started to first of all go a bit sharp, lose focus, and then become airy. So if I'll do a slightly slower version. And it doesn't get louder and it doesn't project. So that's what happens if the airspeed's too fast. So it's so important for low flutes that you get used to controlling a slower airspeed and think about crescendos differently, think about dynamics differently. It's not about pushing air, it's about keeping things open, keeping things resonant. I find personally that practicing Bach is the best way to experiment with this because you have all the intervals jumping around, lots of middle register stuff, and getting used to the position of the different octaves is quite hard. Takes some getting used to, takes some practice. I also find that something like the cello suites, for example, are particularly good for this because the cello, with its low register notes, they're big, they're physical, there's a real sense of physicality in those notes. And we have the same thing on the alto flute. The low notes are where the resonance happens, and maybe the response is slightly slower as well. But then as we go higher, we have different tone qualities in different registers. So I think the cello suites are particularly well suited to working on that kind of air control and getting the airspeed exactly right for the instrument. My next tip is to reconsider vibrato. So vibrato is obviously a fluctuation in the pitch and the sound within the airflow. So the faster the air is, the more vibrato the sound can take. So usually, if you're playing high and loud on a flute, you can give lots of vibrato and it really has power. It helps with the power of the note. However, with low flutes, when you're using slower air speeds all the time, they need a completely different approach. Try removing vibrato completely from your sound, especially in the softer dynamics, and then explore the vibrato for its potential to add colour rather than as a fixed setting. So normally when I'm playing on low flutes, I use very little vibrato compared to the C flute. It often comes in naturally when I'm playing at louder dynamics. But when I'm playing super quietly, which is one of the things I love about low flutes, is the potential to be very, very quiet. It's much nicer to do that without any kind of vibrato. So if I just play some very soft things. Obviously that's with no vibrato, playing around with tone colours, but if I did the same with vibrato, you can hear it changes the character completely. So it's a very useful tool to have, and it's great to be able to decide, yes, I'm going to use it now, or not to use it at all. But it's something that really helps with the expression on low flutes and is definitely worth thinking about. So last but one, don't be afraid to breathe. We all have to breathe, it's part of being alive, and we should celebrate doing so. But we also need a really good flow of air to be able to play expressively. On low flutes, you might find that you need to breathe more often. That's completely fine. For me, it's more important to be able to be expressive and to say something musically than to be in a stress about whether or not you have to breathe or you can't breathe or it's not allowed or whatever. So one thing I would really recommend is practicing breathing in all sorts of different places, and sometimes the really unmusical places, just so that you know you can do it if you absolutely have to. Not that I'm recommending you do, but still. It's important to realise the impact that breathing can have on the mood of the music. So, for example, if you breathe very quickly and in quick succession, then it can create quite a lot of tension in the music and excitement even. However, if you breathe very slowly and you take lots of time over your breathing, it will calm everybody down. And audiences tend to breathe with you, so that's something to keep in mind as well, is how you use the breathing as part of your expression. For performances, I tend to plan 2 or 3 different breathing strategies and practice them all, and sometimes switching between them as well, so that you know that whatever situation you're in in the performance, you've got a situation under control that you've practiced that you don't need to worry about. Sometimes if you're nervous in a performance, you might find yourself breathing more often, or if you're trying to project a little bit more, if the acoustic in the hall is quite dry or something like that and you need to push a little bit more, you might find that changes your breathing. So the more ways that you can practice breathing and be prepared for that, the better. And one other little thing about breathing is don't breathe in more air than you actually need for a phrase, because that can start to build in physical tension and get in the way of the resonance of the sound. So it's not always a case of take in as much air as you can all of the time. Sometimes it's about managing it differently from that. And my last tip of all is to explore solo repertoire for low flutes. Obviously they're great in flute choirs, they're brilliant for ensemble playing, but there's also a huge and rapidly growing repertoire of solo and chamber music for low flutes of all kinds, from alto down to contra and beyond even. There's something for everyone, there's lots of styles available, there are arrangements of pieces, and there are also new compositions. So I would really urge you to go explore, try things out, and if you want some advice at any point about repertoire or some ideas, then feel free to get in touch.